The rain had just stopped over London, leaving the streets shimmering like glass under the fading amber light. Inside the Clarendon Hall, one of the city's quiet, elegant restaurants, the world moved in slow rhythm, silver cutlery, murmured conversations, and the faint hum of a cello recording playing somewhere unseen. At the corner table by the window sat Edward Whitmore, a man who lived by clocks and calendars. His suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly centered, his watch gleaming, a Swiss piece worth more than most people's yearly rent. But his eyes betrayed something softer, a faint trace of someone who had once learned to wait and had grown tired of it. He glanced at his phone. No new message, no missed call. 17 minutes late. His jaw tightened. He despised lateness, not because of pride, but because of the memories it stirred. A boy sitting alone on cold stone steps, waiting for someone who never came. He reached for his coat. Enough. The evening was over before it began. Then, a blur of motion. A tiny figure darted between the waiter's legs. A little girl, maybe 3 years old, curly-haired and wearing a raincoat 2 sizes too big. She ran straight to his table, stopped and looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. "Mommy says she's really sorry, she didn't want to be late." Edward froze. Around him the restaurant blurred into background noise. Laughter, glass clinking, the sound of rain dripping outside. The girl clutched a small plush rabbit to her chest as if it were a passport to safety. "Is this your table?" she asked, pointing to the empty chair opposite him. He nodded before he realized he was doing it. Something in him, something he'd buried deep under years of meetings and negotiations, stirred. And then a voice, breathless, warm, unmistakably flustered. "Amelia!" "Oh dear. Come here, love." The woman who appeared in the doorway wasn't what Edward expected. No dramatic entrance, no designer dress. Just a woman in a navy raincoat, her hair hastily tied back, her cheeks flushed from running. She smiled awkwardly, almost shyly. "I'm so sorry," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She wanted to come say it herself. The girl grinned. "Told you I could do it, Mummy." Her name was Clara Hartwell, and her presence changed the air around the table. Edward hesitated, then gestured to the chair across from him. "You might as well sit down. The table's already reserved." She smiled, slightly embarrassed. "Thank you. It seems fate didn't want to cancel tonight." The waiter approached, unsure, but Edward waved him off. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like leaving. Outside, London glistened. And somewhere deep inside Edward's chest, something long dormant began to breathe again. For the first few minutes, neither of them spoke much. The waiter brought water, a bread basket, and a small pot of Earl Grey that filled the air with a quiet warmth. The little girl, Amelia, sat upright in her booster chair, her small fingers tapping the edge of the plate as if keeping rhythm to a secret tune. Edward watched them, mother and daughter, with the cautious curiosity of a man who wasn't used to company. Clara poured tea for both of them, her movements graceful but unpracticed, as though she had learned elegance through necessity, not habit. "I really am sorry," she said softly. "There was a man on the tube who collapsed. I couldn't just leave him there." Edward's eyes lifted. He expected a polite excuse, traffic, a missed bus, anything ordinary, but this wasn't it. "You helped him?" "I waited with him until the ambulance came. Amelia held my bag like a professional nurse." The little girl nodded proudly, biting a piece of bread. "He wasn't breathing right. Mom said we have to stay when someone needs us." Edward didn't know what to say. People in his world usually looked away from problems. They paid someone else to care. But here was a woman who had stopped her evening for a stranger and arrived smiling anyway. Clara noticed his silence and gave a nervous little laugh. You probably think I'm a mess, late, wet, and bringing a child to a date. He shook his head. Actually, I think you might be the most punctual person I've ever met. You just stopped to save a life first. Her eyes flickered with surprise. And for the first time that evening, she laughed, really laughed, the kind that softens everything around it. Amelia giggled too, perhaps without knowing why, and reached for the sugar packets, building tiny towers from them. Clara reached to stop her, but Edward raised a hand. Let her. Engineers start with sugar cubes. The woman smiled at the unlikely playfulness from a man whose life seemed stitched from order and control. She had heard about Edward Whitmore. The name carried weight in London's financial circles. But sitting here now, he didn't look like a tycoon. He looked like a man quietly relearning how to exist among gentle things. Do you ever rest? She asked suddenly. You look like someone who works even in his sleep. Edward hesitated, then said, Resting is hard when you've built your world around motion. Clara stirred her tea. Then maybe tonight's your first lesson in staying still. Something in her tone made him pause. The restaurant faded into a hush around them. Amelia yawned, leaning against her mother's shoulder. And in that small, unguarded moment, Edward realized he didn't feel the usual itch to check his phone, to control the next step. He simply sat there, listening to the rain start again outside, thinking, perhaps for the first time in years, that he didn't want the evening to end. The dinner unfolded slowly, with a gentleness neither of them had expected. Edward had imagined a polite meal, maybe an exchange of shallow pleasantries, followed by the familiar silence of goodbyes. Instead, he found himself laughing, quietly, awkwardly at first, but then genuinely, at Amelia's endless curiosity. She had a way of turning every object into a story. The breadbasket became a castle. The folded napkins were soldiers. The salt shaker, she declared, was the lonely king waiting for his tea. Clara's cheeks flushed with a mother's mixture of pride and mild embarrassment. Then, without warning, Amelia reached for her water glass and tipped it straight into her mother's lap. A gasp, a splash, a moment of frozen time. Clara shot up, mortified. "Oh no, I'm so sorry." She fumbled for a napkin, but Edward was faster. He pulled a crisp white handkerchief from his inside pocket, not paper, not disposable, but proper cotton, and leaned forward without hesitation. "May I?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded, too startled to speak. He dabbed gently at the wet fabric, his movements careful, precise, almost reverent, not rushed, not awkward, just kind. The air between them shifted, filled with something wordless and fragile. For a brief second, Clara forgot about the embarrassment, the dampness, even the restaurant around them. She just saw this man who had every reason to stay distant, acting with quiet care. "You're not what I expected," she murmured before she could stop herself. He smiled faintly. "And you're not what I planned for." Her laugh came out small but sincere. Most men don't carry handkerchiefs anymore. Most men don't meet little girls who spill water like clockwork. Amelia, oblivious to the tension, announced proudly, "Mommy says accidents make people nicer." That did it. Clara laughed so hard she nearly cried, and even Edward couldn't hold back a genuine grin. The sound startled him. It had been years since laughter felt like breathing instead of effort. After that, the conversation flowed more freely. They spoke of small things, of the bookshop where Clara worked, the scent of old pages, the customers who still paid in coins. Edward shared bits about his work in technology, though without the usual corporate polish. He talked about the nights when success felt heavy, about the silence that filled his apartment. And Clara listened, truly listened, with the kind of attention that made every word sound important. When dessert came, Amelia fell asleep on her mother's shoulder, her tiny hand still clutching the stuffed rabbit. Clara lowered her voice. "You don't seem like someone who belongs to this world," she said softly. "Maybe I don't," he replied. "But tonight it feels like I might want to." The waiter approached, ready to clear the table, but Edward gestured subtly for him to wait. He didn't want the moment to end just yet. Outside, London's rain tapped softly against the glass as if echoing a rhythm that neither of them wanted to forget. The restaurant had begun to thin out by the time they left. The rain had stopped again, leaving the London streets slick and glowing beneath the lamps. Edward held the door open as Clara stepped outside, Amelia sleeping soundly in her arms. The night air carried a faint scent of rain and roasted chestnuts from a vendor nearby. "I'll drive you home," Edward offered, matter of fact but gentle. "It's late." Clara shook her head, smiling. "Thank you, but we'll take the bus. Amelia loves sitting by the window." He blinked, caught off guard. "The bus? At this hour?" "She thinks it's magic," Clara said, adjusting her daughter's blanket. "All those lights rushing past, people you'll never meet again. It's her favorite thing in the world." There was no defensiveness in her tone, no pride, just a quiet acceptance of the life she lived. She wasn't apologizing for not fitting into his world. She didn't need to. They walked together toward the nearest stop. The pavement glistened, reflecting the streetlights like 1,000 small mirrors. Amelia stirred in her mother's arms, but didn't wake. Her small hand still clutched Edward's handkerchief. "May I at least wait with you?" he asked. Clara hesitated, then nodded. "All right." They stood side by side beneath the glass shelter, the silence comfortable. A taxi splashed past, followed by the hum of the next bus approaching from afar. "You really take the bus every day?" Edward asked. "Every day. It gives me time to think, to breathe." "Doesn't it exhaust you?" She smiled faintly. "It's life. Bills don't pay themselves. And Amelia thinks dinner magically appears in the fridge, so I keep the illusion alive." Edward chuckled, a soft, unfamiliar sound. He hadn't laughed like that in years. Clara glanced at him sideways. "You know, I didn't expect tonight to be kind." "Kind?" "Yes. Most first dates are performances. This one felt..." She searched for the word. "Like sitting down after running for too long." He wanted to tell her he felt the same, that for the first time in years, he didn't feel like an observer in his own life. But the words stuck somewhere in his throat. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes and warm light spilling from its open door. Clara turned to him. "Thank you, Edward, for dinner and for not minding the chaos." He smiled. "It's been the most ordered chaos I've ever enjoyed." She laughed softly, stepped aboard, and found a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away, Amelia stirred and waved sleepily. "Bye-bye, Mr. Edward." He raised a hand, watching the red double-decker disappear into the distance until the tail lights blurred into the rain. For a long time he stood there, coat damp, the city whispering around him. Then he looked down at his phone. For once there were no messages, no meetings, no noise. Just a reflection of his own faint smile in the dark screen. 3 days passed before Edward saw her again, though he would never have called it waiting. He told himself it was coincidence when he walked through Bloomsbury, coffee in hand, passing the narrow streets lined with bookshops and florists. But when he paused outside Hartwell's books and saw her through the glass, he knew there was nothing accidental about it. Clara stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, hair loose around her face. She was helping an elderly man find a second-hand poetry collection, her voice patient, her smile genuine. Behind her, shelves leaned slightly under the weight of worn paperbacks and dreams long read, The bell over the door chimed softly as Edward stepped in. "Looking for something particular?" she asked, glancing up, and then stopping when she saw him. "Or just avoiding the rain again?" "Maybe both," he admitted, trying not to look too pleased. Amelia wasn't there this time. The shop felt quieter but not empty, as if her laughter still lived between the books. Edward picked up a copy of Wuthering Heights, turning it over just to have something to do with his hands. "Don't tell me you're a Bronte man," Clara teased. "I'm trying to be unpredictable," he replied. "How am I doing?" "Terribly," she smiled. "You look more like a Dickens man. Structure, precision, justice at the end." He laughed softly. "You've got me figured out already?" "I work in a bookshop," she said, arranging a small stack of novels. "We see the endings people expect." He leaned against the counter, watching her work. "And what ending do you expect for yourself, Clara Hartwell?" She paused. "Something quiet, I suppose. Warm. A story where no one rushes." For a moment, the shop felt like a world apart from the city outside, the hum of traffic replaced by the whisper of pages. Edward glanced at the framed photo by the till. Clara and Amelia at the seaside, wind in their hair, both laughing into the sunlight. "She looks happy," he said softly. "She's a child," Clara replied. "They believe the world is kind, until we teach them otherwise." The words lingered. Edward wanted to ask more, but instead he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small brown paper bag. "For Amelia," he said. Clara opened it carefully. Inside were a few vintage fairy tale books, their covers faded but beautiful, gold lettering glinting faintly. "She asked last time if Cinderella ever got bored after the wedding," he said. "I thought we could give her other endings." Clara's fingers tightened around the books. "That's incredibly thoughtful." He shrugged, embarrassed. "I have a weakness for stories that keep going after happily ever after." She looked up, and for the first time, her gaze lingered on him a heartbeat too long. Outside, rain began again, tapping softly on the window like punctuation in an unwritten sentence. It began on a Wednesday morning. Grey sky, light drizzle, the sort of London day that made time feel slower. Clara was stacking books on the shop's front display when her phone buzzed 3 times in a row. Normally she ignored notifications, but something in the rhythm of it made her look. 3 messages, all from friends, all with links. She opened one and froze. There it was. A headline on a glossy online magazine. "Tech tycoon Edward Whitmore, seen with bookshop clerk and her child, love or charity?" Below it, grainy photos. Edward kneeling beside Amelia outside the park, Clara laughing beside them, unaware of the camera. The captions were cruel in their precision. "The billionaire's soft side, single mother wins a heart," and headlines. Her stomach turned cold. Within minutes, her quiet corner of the world became a spectacle. Notifications exploded, people tagging, commenting, judging. Words like gold digger, publicity stunt, petty romance burned across her screen. The bell above the door rang, and a customer entered. She flinched instinctively. The world had shifted, and she could feel it pressing through the glass. When Edward arrived later that afternoon, she was still standing behind the counter, pale and trembling, the shop half closed. "I saw it," he said quietly, stepping inside. No chauffeur, no suite, just jeans, rain, and regret. "Of course you did," she replied, voice barely steady. "Everyone has." He took a step closer. "Clara, I had nothing to do with—" "I know," she interrupted, eyes flashing. "But they don't, and they don't care." She pushed the phone toward him. The comments glowed like firelight between them. "Do you see what they're saying? I'm not a headline, Edward. I don't belong in your press releases. His face tightened. Neither do I. I didn't choose this. She laughed bitterly. That's the difference. You can walk away. I can't. This is my home, my child's school, my life. He tried again. Let me fix it. Fix it? Her voice broke. You can't fix being humiliated. You can't buy silence. The sound of rain filled the pause. Amelia's small drawing on the wall behind them, a stick family under a rainbow, swayed slightly in the draft from the open door. Edward's voice softened. Clara, I just wanted to stay real between us. She met his gaze, tears trembling but unshed. Then you should have stayed when it stopped being easy. He hesitated, then whispered, I'm still here. Too late, she said, turning away. From the back room came a soft, sleepy voice. Mummy, is he going away? Edward froze. Amelia stood there, clutching her rabbit, eyes wide. He wanted to kneel, to speak, to explain, but nothing came. He just nodded, once, quietly, then left, the door clicking shut behind him. The shop was silent except for the rain. Clara stood unmoving, one hand on the counter, the other on her daughter's head. The glow from the phone dimmed, but its echo lingered. The noise of a world that had never cared for quiet love. The days that followed were painfully quiet. Clara stopped checking her phone. The shop stayed half empty. Her friends' messages went unanswered. Even Amelia, usually a storm of laughter, seemed subdued. She still placed Edward's fairy tale book beside her pillow each night, but never asked about him anymore. On the third evening, the knock came. Soft, hesitant. Clara froze, heart racing. She almost didn't open the door. But when she did, he was there. Edward Whitmore, no chauffeur, no polished shoes, no expensive coat. Just him. Hair damp from rain, hands full of 2 plain plastic grocery bags. I brought dinner, he said. She stared. Dinner? He nodded, a nervous half-smile flickering. Instant noodles, chicken flavor, the spicy one you said you like. And he held up the second bag. Chocolate, popcorn, and fake cocoa mix. My culinary rebellion. Clara blinked, torn between disbelief and laughter. You're joking. Not even slightly. He stepped closer. I'm not here as the man in the articles, not the CEO. Just someone who would rather eat noodles with you than steak alone. Something in his tone, weary, unguarded, disarmed her. She looked past him at the grey sky outside, then back at him. And what do you want me to say, Edward? That I forgive you? That everything's fine again? He shook his head. No, I just want to stay. Even if it's awkward, even if it hurts a bit. Behind her, small footsteps padded across the hallway. Amelia appeared, hair messy from sleep, clutching her rabbit. Mr. Edward? She whispered. Mummy washed your hanky. She held it out, perfectly folded, smelling faintly of lavender. Edward knelt, taking it as though it were something sacred. Thank you, he murmured. Will you stay this time? The little girl asked, her voice serious. Clara turned away, blinking fast. The room was too full of silence. Edward stood, meeting her eyes. Clara, I know what they're saying. I can't change the noise, but I can choose what I do now. And I choose to be here, not to rescue you, to belong with you. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders. You really bought noodles? He smiled, relieved. And chocolate. Her lips curved faintly. Then stay, at least until the water boils. He laughed. A real laugh, tired and human. Together they unpacked the bags in the tiny kitchen. Amelia clapped her hands. Then we watched the dragon movie after, right? You like dragons? I love dragons, Edward said solemnly. The kettle hissed. The three of them moved easily around each other, the hum of the city fading beyond the walls. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, just a quiet, ordinary evening with steam rising from a pot and the scent of something new beginning. For the first time, Edward didn't feel like visiting a world not his own. He felt home. Sunday morning arrived with the scent of rain-soaked brick and fresh bread drifting through the open window. The city was half asleep, wrapped in a quiet golden haze. Clara poured tea into 2 chipped mugs, the steam curling upward like something fragile and alive. Edward stood by the window, his shirt sleeves rolled, holding a small paper bag from the bakery downstairs. "Cinnamon rolls," he said. "The last 3 they had." "Then it's fate," Clara murmured, smiling. Amelia came bouncing in moments later, barefoot, her hair a tangle of curls, her hands already full of colored chalk. "We're going to the park, right? You promised." Edward looked at Clara. She nodded. You can't argue with a promise sealed by breakfast. They walked together down the narrow street, the world around them soft and new. The pavement glistened, church bells rang somewhere far away. Edward carried the bag of pastries, Clara held her tea. Amelia hopped ahead, splashing through puddles, a streak of color in her yellow coat. When they reached the small park, Amelia dropped to her knees on the path and opened her box of chalks. "Here," she said firmly. "We draw first." Clara laughed. "What are we drawing, sweetheart?" "A family." She began to draw with determined strokes. A tall figure, a smaller one, and a tiny one between them. 3 stick people holding hands beneath a lopsided sun. Then she added a heart over their heads, big and uneven, filled with too many colors. Edward knelt beside her, silent. Something in his chest ached, a warmth that was almost pain. Clara stepped closer, her eyes glistening as she watched. "That's beautiful, darling," she whispered. Amelia turned to Edward, tilting her head. "That's you," she said, pointing at the tallest figure. He swallowed hard. "Is it?" She nodded solemnly. "You bring noodles and stories. That means you're family." Clara's breath caught. She looked at Edward, but he didn't speak. Instead, he set the paper bag down on the bench, removed his jacket, and slowly knelt on the warm pavement beside the chalk drawing. His voice, when it came, was quiet, the kind that trembles at the edge of hope. "May I stay?" he asked. "For every late night, every tomorrow you still have?" Clara stood motionless for a heartbeat, sunlight flickering across her face. Then she knelt too, cupping his face in both hands. "You stayed when it was hard," she whispered. "Of course you can stay when it's good." Behind them, Amelia clapped her hands, chalk dust flying. "Then we make pancakes every Saturday," she declared. Edward laughed and Clara joined in. The sound pure, light, unguarded, they rose together, hand in hand, 3 shadows overlapping on the bright path. As they walked away, the drawing remained behind. Crooked, colorful, imperfect, but entirely true. Sometimes love doesn't need vows or grand gestures. Sometimes it's just someone who doesn't leave. And in that simple staying, a new story quietly began.